Our lesson for our meditation this morning is from the Old Testament book of Micah the prophet in chapter 5. A portion of this will also be referenced in our children's sermon. This is from Micah 5. I'd like to follow along in your service folder. But you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come for me one who will be ruler over Israel, whose origins are from of old, from ancient times. Therefore, Israel will be abandoned until the time when she who is in labor bears a son, and the rest of his brothers return to join the Israelites. He will stand and shepherd his flock in the strength of the Lord, in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God, and they will live securely. For then his greatness will reach to the ends of the earth, and he will be our peace. This is the word of the Lord. Begin with a prayer. Lord, open now my heart to hear, and through your word to me draw near. Let me your word, your pure retain. Let me your child, and e'er remain. Amen. North San Juan, California. Hat Creek, California. Fiddletown, California. Anyone been to any of those towns? Whoa, okay. Surprising. There are only a couple hundred people in those towns. They're the out-of-the-way places. They're the places where you would blink and you would miss them if you would look at those towns. They're ones that no one would say, hey, we're going to go vacation here because this is a great, great recreation town with a lot of things happening. There simply aren't. When you look at those towns, they don't even have a Walmart, of all things. How can they be considered a town if they don't have that? Bethlehem was a small, little hick town. A couple hundred people, to 200 to 300 people. You could probably fit the entire town population in this room, standing up. No problem. It was so out of the way, it wouldn't be on the map. It was a town that didn't even have a Walmart. So what made it so famous? What made a town like Fiddletown greater than New York City? What made a town like Hat Creek more prominent than Los Angeles? The triune God, the second person of the triune God, came in flesh and blood to Bethlehem. God's own Son came from heaven and was born a human being in Bethlehem. And that's what put it on the map. And today we see when this king who came to Bethlehem, to David's town, is one who comes. He comes, we see, as one who is ruler over his people. We also see he comes as a shepherd for his people. When the wise men came to Jerusalem looking for this king, whose star they had followed from the east, they came looking for him in the place where he naturally would go, is Jerusalem, the capital, where the king would be. And those chief priests and teachers of the law to whom they came knew exactly where this king was going to be born. Because after all, they quoted from Micah. They said, "In Bethlehem in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written." The name Bethlehem means house of bread. Do you think maybe God had in mind when he brought his son into Bethlehem as the baby, God in the flesh, the one who is the bread of life? Could it be a little bit of a play on words there? He certainly brought him to Bethlehem and into Bethlehem's town because that's where King David had come from. And the prophecy said he was going to come from David's line in David's town is where you're going to find him to be born. Messiah is coming there. And that's where God brought his son into the world in a small, little, out-of-the-place way of Bethlehem. But in addition to all this, we see Micah tells us about the small, insignificant town of Bethlehem. Out of you, Bethlehem, will come for me one who will be ruler over Israel, whose origins are from of old, from ancient times. A ruler over Israel. Israel wasn't enjoying self-rule at the time that Jesus came. In fact, it had been hundreds and hundreds of years since they had really experienced self-rule and having their own king. Because you look at the beginning of Jesus' life here on earth, the middle of his life, the end of his life, and even 40 years after his life and more, there was a ruler in Israel, and its name was Rome. And God's promise through Micah said, I'm going to bring a ruler over Israel, a king who's coming. But he's not going to be one who has border lands, walls up to stop invading armies. He's not one who's going to be having a specific geographical area. He is a spiritual king who is coming, who's going to rule over all of God's people, and that includes some outside of Israel. Listen to what he said again. Therefore, Israel will be abandoned until the time when she who is in labor gives birth, and the rest of his brothers return to join the Israelites. You looked at Israel at that time of Jesus. You looked at Bethlehem at the time when he was born, and for all intents and purposes, God had abandoned his people. No self-rule, seeming to be quiet to them. Where was he? And that's what Micah says. It looks like he's abandoned you. But did you catch what he also says? Until the time when she who is in labor gives birth. Somebody giving birth in Bethlehem. Oh, there's Jesus being born. When Mary gave birth to her firstborn, a son, we see God was making good on this promise from the prophet Micah. And he says, and he's this king who's going to bring his brothers all back to himself, his brothers and sisters back to himself. That would mean those shepherds out in the fields nearby. That would mean his apostles, his disciples, his followers. That would include the wise men from the east outside of Israel, Gentiles. That's us. He's going to bring them to himself. The eternal God was coming to Bethlehem to rule his kingdom. And he does have a ruling influence over our lives too, doesn't he? Although you look at it, what kind of ruling influence has he had over your life when I do the evaluation of mine? You've ended up being too busy to read the words of God, just too busy for it. Where's the king's influence there? Where's his ruling influence when we turn our back on the word? When our brother or sister makes us upset and we end up giving them a smack in anger towards them, is that God's ruling influence over our lives, or is that some other influence happening there? The Lord beautifully opens up his words to us in the Bible, and he shows pure good news to us in what he does through his Son, with sins and salvation and heaven and the help that he gives. And yet, lack of joy, anger, depression, selfishness. Where's the influence of the king there? Although he's given me joy, I choose something else and do something else. You see, when we do these things, when we find ourselves doing things that are not right, or doing things for the right things for the wrong reasons, or we express a lack of trust in our God with who he is and what he's done and what he's said to us, we're setting up a kingdom and setting up a war against this ruler overall, and that will never end up well, will it? I'm going to lose that war. In fact, if I go to war with him in that, I will lose eternally with that. Here is one who's coming who is ruler over all. But the amazing thing also you hear about Micah's prophecy, he says, and this one who's coming, he's also a shepherd. Listen to what he said. He will stand and shepherd his flock in the strength of the Lord, in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God. He wasn't simply a ruler who's coming to quash rebellion. He's a shepherd. He's a shepherd who comes, and you see him coming in the strength of the Lord, in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God. He comes as a shepherd with God's strength. To do what? I need him to be the shepherd who completely gives obedience to my Father in heaven when I've rebelled against him. I needed him to be the shepherd who comes with the strength and the majesty of God, whose life was lit up in perfectness, who had no unrighteous anger, who never was one who went into this woe is me and went off and said, I've forgotten my heavenly Father. He didn't do that. Children, ready to spread this Christmas message today, adults here today, you have the shepherd who came with the strength of his God and the majesty of his God and said, my obedience is yours. It's yours and given to you. And the amazing thing about this shepherd that we see also is that when he sees his sheep put in harm's way, what does he do? He comes with the strength and the majesty of the Lord to put himself in that way, in harm's way. Because as a shepherd for his sheep, anything that was going to attack his sheep, any wolf that would come along, anything that could drag them away and harm them, he's the one who came and put himself in harm's way. And you're going to be proclaiming about him coming that way too. He's coming to put himself in harm's way, and that's where we travel with this baby who grew up to be a man and go to this place called Calvary at a cross where he put himself in harm's way. And as the shepherd who laid down his life for his sheep, he certainly had the power and the majesty and the strength of his God to take it up again. And because he could take it up again, and he lived, when all these sinful things keep twirling around in front of our faces and into our hearts, into our lives, and we find ourselves as sinners before this God, children and adults here today, Jesus has a response to those. He's in heaven before his Father and says, don't hold them for these. Don't hold these against them. I put them away. I remove them, dear Father. They are your own sheep. I brought them into your flock. When you listen to Micah, he says, and this message moved past Micah to us. Listen to what he says again. He said about Jesus, his greatness will reach to the ends of the earth. You want to understand more about this Jesus when you are in distress, when those sins get the best of you and you think your God has abandoned you, when you think you're going at it alone, and you feel forgotten, and those sins weigh on your heart because of things you've said and you've done, the greatness will reach to the ends of the earth. And the amazing thing is, Micah ends his prophecy and says, yeah, this is a great king who's ruler and shepherd of his people. But the last part he says, and he will be our peace. He brings peace to the heart of knowing that as my king and my shepherd, all is at peace with my God. No matter how low I've dipped, no matter how long I've been away, he's my peace. He will bring our peace. For that little child of Bethlehem, he is a king indeed. From heaven above to earth he came to help a world in need. Enjoy his peace.